Do you know that your feelings are smarter than you think, that you have an emotional self-cleaning oven, and that you can free yourself from traumatic memories? That's what we're going to talk about today with this guest who we have on, whose name is Dr. Deborah Sandella. I'm really looking forward to this one. So this is a cool backstory for everyone listening. I actually have used her method and accessed a facilitator who does it, and it have had incredible results. And we'll talk about it throughout the show. But you all know I'm always looking for cool tips, tricks, ways, strategies to help you thrive in your life and business. And when I came across this method and started using it and working with it, I was blown away by the results. So I got online and I looked up who created it, and really cool how the universe works. She actually lives really close to me, and we're not together today, but I'm sure at some point we'll meet. I did some research and I thought, okay, I've got to have her on the show because it's so incredible what she does. So Dr. Deb is the author of the #1 international bestseller, Goodbye Hurt and Pain: 7 Simple Steps to Health, Love, and Success. She's an award-winning psychotherapist, a university professor, the originator of the groundbreaking RIM method, which is the method I'm talking about, and it's backed by neuroscience. So she's been featured in USA Today, CBS, CNN, super powerful woman with an incredible method that is changing lives. So we are psyched to have her on the show today. Thank you so much for coming on. Welcome, Dr. Deb.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dig in. I am just psyched that you're here. Let's go way backstory. Tell us first how you became, what it got you interested in psychotherapy, and some of the ways that you ended up coming up with the RIM method and what it is.
Well, I was always interested in psych. I mean, in terms of, I was always curious about what makes people tick, and I was always interested in my own feelings and all of that. So, right away, I knew I wanted to do something in the psych field. And so I ended up having all kinds of education and working for over 20 years. And actually in 1995, I had an experience that really changed my life in all kinds of ways, where I was awakened by my brother in the middle of the night that my dad had had a cardiac arrest and that his blood pressure wasn't holding. The nurses had called and they wanted us to sign a no resuscitate agreement. And it was just this weird experience because my first career was as a nurse, a psychiatric nurse. And so I totally understood, but I found myself being really angry with the nurses that they were calling and asking this. And I said no, and totally out of character. But there was something that really kicked in that was very strong. And as I hung up the phone and I started to walk back to bed, I had this spontaneous imagery pop up in my mind of seeing my dad walk off to the horizon. Mm-hmm. And there I was yelling and screaming at him, "I'm not ready for you to go. I'm so mad about this." And then all of a sudden he just turned and he looked at me with a kind of calm I had never seen before, and said, "Oh, okay. I didn't know you felt that way." And then, in that moment I thought, oh, this is just my mind, right? And all my anger just drained away. It was like more now, I just felt like I needed to keep a connection with him. So in the morning when I flew to Kansas to be at his bedside, they said sometime in the middle of the night, his blood pressure had started to hold. And so he ended up surviving for 5 more years that my parents said were the best years of their lives, because they had this whole new realization of it could go at any minute. So it really changed. I mean, at that time I was an academic at the time and focused on research, and this experience just didn't compute. It was an experience just out of the blue, but it changed what felt important. So after that, I decided I had to know more. I had to
Mm-hmm.
explore this, and it was more of an experiential exploring, I would say, and the exploring around imagination, probably my spiritual journey, and then also really beginning to study and understand imagination. So that's been over 20 years now, and RIM
Wow.
is the result.
That's amazing. I love that. Okay, and share with listeners what RIM stands for.
Right. Well, RIM stands for regenerating images in memory. Now
Okay.
that has been our evolution. That's the scientific definition of REM. The very first one back 20 years ago was releasing the inner magician,
Mm-hmm.
which came in a very magical way. I never would have thought of it, but in the end, because we're starting to do some work with kids in schools now, because that's such an important place that's needing, where people are needing assistance and needing something quick and easy. We're using that as the kid friendly way to talk about it. But the adult way at this point is regenerating images in memory.
Okay. Okay. I love terms like names that we come up with. Releasing the inner magician. Okay. And I have to say, having experienced REM, that is what it feels like. It's super incredible. Okay, so talk to us a little bit about the neuroscience aspect. And I know, being an academic and stepping into coaching and going from a social science background for myself, and then now in the realm of manifestation and law of attraction and all these things, it's such an interesting bridge to gap. Um, how did that go for you? I'm curious. When you had this experience and you couldn't explain it necessarily scientifically, what happened for you, and what'd you do to figure that out?
Well, I got just so curious about it, and became much more interested in meditation, because there was something that was happening that was not in reality in the physical world around me, but it was in reality in my awareness. So I began to really become very interested in states of awareness,
Mm-hmm.
um, which has continued on through my life, I would say, including, spending time in Australia, understanding the Aboriginal dream time. So,
Oh, wow.
in whatever ways. But then recently, so the journey was that it was like just so curious about these states of awareness and where this is coming from, and feeling like my left brain just didn't understand it, so I had to give that up, kind of, for
Uh-huh.
a while. And
Yeah.
then I needed to pull it back in again to start to really understand it from the neuroscience perspective, and how to teach it, and how to ground it in a way people could understand. And so the book that really explains REM, Goodbye Hurt and Pain, it's been very grounded language that anybody can relate to and understand. So, but it's been a real process. It's been a
Oh,
journey.
yeah, I'm sure. What you said, I know you said your brother woke you up telling you about your dad. How old were you when that happened?
Oh no, he just called
He
me. I was
called you. Okay. So it
like,
was like okay, this was more recent.
yeah,
But
I was
RIM,
ill.
okay, so and RIM has been around, like when she developed the method. I know that methods evolve over time.
Totally.
So
So
the origin of it was how many years ago?
about now, I would say 20, close to 25 was the
Okay.
beginning, 25 years.
Wow.
Um,
I love that. And
yeah,
so, for you, from the neuroscience perspective, for listeners, explain a little bit what that looks like. To me, it sounds like you're bridging the left and the right in a lot of ways with the
absolutely.
method.
Absolutely. And that's the way that I talk about it. And in fact, one of the reasons that this team of researchers at the University of Colorado is very interested in REM and wants to really work with it is they have somebody on their team that has written about a two-mind theory.
Uh,
Instead of thinking about beings, we're so left brain oriented in our culture. We
yeah.
try to analyze and figure everything out, and but what happens is we really lose the resourcefulness of the creative emotional brain and the root of our pain, of our emotional pain, starts in a very different place than the left brain or
Mm.
the thinking mind. They would call it the reasoning part of the brain. And so REM, actually, just like my experience, it starts from spontaneous imagery and body awareness. So we're really starting with the emotional, creative aspects of the brain, which is nonverbal. And that's the reason we have not been able to work with it very well, and why they're just now starting to be able to look at researching it, is that it's much harder to measure something that's nonverbal. So what REM does, though, is that part of the brain is really what we connect with first and access in the body what is there, allow it to start to be known through imagination or images, sensing. All of the senses, all the body senses are very important, and also bringing information. And then the left brain can come in as the partner or the thinking mind, the reasoning mind can come in as a partner to give it words and meaning. So we end up in what we call whole brain function, which is a very different place of resourcefulness. Because when we're really stuck in our head, what happens is we disconnect from the body. It's like, I talk about it, and we've all felt this, like a chicken with its head cut off is when we're just in the body. But if you're just in the cut off head, you can't do anything. You can't go anywhere. And so, you become a talking head. And without really being a whole person, we don't feel resourced. We know intuitively we're missing something when we're not connected with all of who we are, both physically, emotionally, and I would say spiritually, or spirit, who you are as a spirit.
So powerful. It's when you were talking, I was exactly thinking that. I was like, the mind-body connection, that piece that we tend to overlook, especially, a lot of my listeners are entrepreneurs. Like, as entrepreneurs building businesses, we can get really stuck in our heads. Yes. And it's important to think about the health of our body, the well-being of our body. So I talk a lot about meditation, that kind of thing. I'm interested, something you made me think of, which is another hot topic that I talk about a lot and enjoy talking about, is thinking about that subconscious part that runs us versus the conscious part. And to me, what I just noticed, because I've gotten to experience REM, is thinking about how it brought the unconscious conscious.
That's exactly right. And I would expand the word subconscious. So the way that I define, just for clarity when I'm teaching, the subconscious is that kind of human level of emotional memory and experience and beliefs that you're not aware of in your current life. But there's a whole lot more to us in that area. So it's really the non-conscious or the unconscious, because it may not be from our own experience. It may be an intuitive connection with what I would call the wisdom of the ages that shows up, and it does. It really shows up. I mean, I've been blown away by it myself personally, and sitting with clients or my own experience. So we're really opening up, but we've been afraid to do that because Freud kind of taught us that the unconscious is the subconscious, and in the subconscious that's all neurotic and sick. And so we had a very biased introduction to that which is unconscious or non-conscious. And so what's happening is when we turn that off and we're afraid of it, we're actually denying resourcefulness that is available to us. And so what happens is, what is in that unconscious or non-conscious space, which includes the subconscious, we learn the root of the problem. And soon as we learn the root of the problem, what it really is, then the answers start to also naturally flow, spontaneous. We don't have to think about it. And that's why it's really a radically different way of working with emotions than what I was educated in. And I had a whole lot of years of education.
Yeah. And a lot of years in practice as well.
Right. Exactly. 40 years of practice now.
Wow. Okay.
Just about to turn 70 next week. So
happy birthday. Congratulations.
Thank you.
70 years young.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. This is, I mean, I want to nerd out right now, and I don't want to over nerd out for the guests, because I love to talk about conscious, unconscious, subconscious differences between that, and what we're doing in helping people. I really think about my work as helping people bring their unconscious or subconscious conscious, so that they can work with it, because if it's running their lives and they don't even know it, which it is for most people, how do you actually shift? You can't just shift with action alone. You've got to actually go into those deeply rooted belief systems that are both conscious and unconscious.
That's right.
So it's really powerful work. When I opened the show, I was talking about, do you know that your feelings are smarter than you think? Will you talk about that a little bit? I love that. And for everyone listening, so just a little bit of a background information about how podcast development works. When I invite guests on, I have them come up with some ideas that they want to talk about. And every single one of them that she put, I was like, yes, 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 yes. And so those came from Dr. Deb, talking about, do you know that your feelings are smarter than you think? So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yes, thank you. Well, who is it? It's Salk, who created the vaccine. He said, your intuition will show your mind where to look.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is really critical, because if we start in the mind, we don't look deep. We look across problem solving ways, and what happens is the creative, magical answers that are there for us just don't get accessed. So that it is through our emotional self that we go to the root. We can start to have it's like things we never thought of show up and tell us, wow, this is amazing. And right away, what's really helpful with, and using it with the kind of work that you're doing, coaching or psychotherapy, is that there's no resistance then. The client is having their own experience of what's happening. We're just following that. We're not telling them what the problem is, so that you don't have to beat your head against the wall. You don't have to try to talk people into understanding what you understand. And so it's all very organic. So the way that I have learned to look at it, because I really, in this, over the last 25 years, I had to put aside what I thought I knew, and also what I thought was possible or impossible, because otherwise I would have limited it to what I already had acquired, the skills I had already acquired. And so what I've learned, which I never would have guessed, never would have known, is that we actually have a very resourced emotional operating system, is what I call it, the EOS.
Love it.
That we're just trying to talk into doing things, but it has its own way that is so much more effective, so that it empowers us, because we're born with this EOS, and it's actually very adequate. We've just been overriding it with thought. And so what happens is the clients are, or whether you're doing it for yourself, because you can apply it to, you can do self-RIM, that it can be so much more effective and easier and quicker than we've ever thought. Because the association with doing emotional work is like this long, torturous, painful, emotional experience. But that is really not the case when we allow it to be the organic way that our own natural system works. And so that's why I'm so committed to be working with schools and kids from the very beginning, to start having them appreciate their emotional resourcefulness and trust it.
I love that. Oh, that's so powerful. I mean, what you're saying, it's tying to that emotional self-cleaning oven. So if you access your own emotional resourcefulness and look to your emotions as a guide to tell you something you need to know, instead of trying to push the feelings away, it can actually help you shift in a new direction. Or how would you language it? Shift, embrace, overcome.
It's really a transform.
Transform.
because
Okay.
you learn, you really look at the whole situation changes, your whole
Mm-hmm.
perspective changes, which changes, we change the feeling changes, well, that automatically changes behavior, and it automatically changes your belief system.
Yeah.
You start believing different things, like you start believing in yourself that you have the ability to do this, first of all, because what happens is emotions are invisible and they're non-logical, they're illogical. So we really haven't trusted them because of that, and they scare us because of that. And so in REM, feelings start to take form. So, because we're using imagination, but it's spontaneous imagination, but instead of talking about anger, and then we just talk about anger, and our feeling is we're all so afraid of anger because it seems like it's going to destroy everything around us and us. We're going to be angry people or whatever. But now, when anger becomes, let's say, or it takes the form of a red hot ball in your stomach, it now has boundaries. So now we have something to work with. So now the thinking mind is no longer afraid, because the thinking mind does not like things it can't see or measure.
Yeah.
That's what it's all oriented towards, is measurement and evaluation and assessment and visibility, making, being able to see what the answer is. And so now the reasoning mind is come on board with, like, oh, we can do this. We
Yeah.
can be fighting logic. We can be fighting the linear thinking process. The emotions can. And so we want them to become partners so that both sides are appreciated, which in the end really heightens our ability to have joy and a sense of excitement and aliveness.
Yeah.
Because if you turn off your emotional operating system and you're only living in your linear logical brain, you start to get pretty boring.
Right. The interesting thing, right, is a lot of people try to do that because they want to repress the bad feelings, but it also represses the good feelings.
Exactly. That's
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yes, you get a kind of a one-sided experience. It's not possible. So you just become kind of an automaton.
Exactly. So that in the process of REM, like you've experienced, and you will be able to relate to this, we can start to get comfortable with feeling emotion and not being afraid. It
Yeah.
happens organically. It happens naturally. We don't have to think about, okay, I'm going to do this now.
Yeah, it's so powerful. So everyone listening, just to share, when I went into my session, I love where you're talking about, the fireball. Let's say there's a fireball in your stomach. You have a way to visualize something and put a solid, like you were saying, a solid boundary around the feeling and put a name to the feeling. And so it changes the entire experience of it, and it makes it feel like it's a safe space to experience that, because there's a container for it and it's not going to last forever necessarily. And
Right.
that you can kind of talk with it and work with it and move with it. And I was sharing with Dr. Deb right before this that I don't cry a lot, and I have a lot of tools to manage myself, right, and my perceptions. And when emotions come up, I don't repress them necessarily, I don't think, but sometimes I think some of the tools I have, I'm starting to realize can repress. It's kind of like almost like a bypass.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I stepped into RIM, I was like, holy moly, I had no idea that I had all of that going on, because the facilitator I worked with, her name, she's been on the podcast. She's incredible. So anyone who needs a facilitator who's local, let me know, and I'll send you her way, because she's incredible. Her name's she calls herself Reverend Lunch Lady. and also Dr. Deb, on her website, there's going to be a link to a directory of facilitators. But when I stepped into this session, she's like, what do you want to work on? I was like, oh, I want to work on any money blocks I can't see in my business. And it ended up turning a totally different direction. And I was bawling within like 10 minutes, just like streaming tears. And I was like blown away by the power of the release of those feelings that I didn't even know that I was having block me in ways that I couldn't see. So it's just, it's incredible. For people who haven't gotten to experience it, will you give a description of what it's like to experience REM? And, people have gotten to hear what the benefits are. It's linking the left and the right and using your emotions as a gateway to help you transform, that you can have shifts in perception about traumatic experiences, or even an awareness of experiences or an awareness of feelings. Can you share a little bit about what the process is like in and of itself?
Well, I think when you said manage your feelings, that's key. That's what we do in general. People try to manage. And in that, there is an inherent lack of connecting with what's unknown.
Uh-huh.
So we're only dealing with what is known. And so as we know, the tip of the iceberg, it doesn't show you a whole lot of what's beneath. It gets bigger as it goes down.
Yeah.
So the process is really a process that is client generated. And what that means is, like, what I teach a lot of facilitators, and the biggest skill that they have to learn is to follow the client's experience. So we're following rather than directing. And over the 25 years, I have just keep learning more and more, successful ways to access through. They're very subtle. When you want to access things that are invisible, it's all in the subtleties.
Mm-hmm.
It is not in the linear protocol steps at all. It's in the subtleties. So the way that we learn to engage the client's subconscious and unconscious is very subtle, but extremely effective and powerful. And some of that is the way I think about it. This is as a therapist, or what I have learned is that when we really trust the emotional operating system and we're following the client's experience. So now when we really engage the imagination to bring up images and awarenesses and sensations that represent the issue sometimes, or just represent what's going on, that whatever shows up, we absolutely trust it, 100%. We do not question the client. And so one of the things that we tell clients is, you cannot do this wrong. Because it's just that we're just tapping a deeper sensory and non-conscious part of you and giving it visibility and words. And so as we're doing that, it takes us, this is where I'm so amazed. And eventually we'll be figuring this out in the neuroscience, like what really is happening in the brain. Like, we're really talking about, doing a session while we're in an MRI.
Yeah.
Something that we're talking about, because it's fascinating. Because what happens is, in the organic system, it just naturally, by following your sensory and imaginary experiences of what's showing up, it takes us right to the root cause. And that's like, it's just so magical, because the mind doesn't know the root cause. And my mind, the facilitator's mind or the client's mind does not know that.
Yeah. And when you say that, you mean, like, what I'm interpreting it as, and I want to know if this is true, is that the mind doesn't consciously know the root cause, but the cause is there. And we can tap into understanding it more.
And I would say that it's like the body and emotion. The feeling and the emotion is what we're following.
Okay.
And the sensation. So it's really body centered rather than thinking centered. So, and I tend to separate mind and body in, the parts. Now, I know I've been at the CU, there's a psychologist there, and he talks about it as two kinds of mind. So it depends how you're looking at it, but it's all the same thing.
Yeah. It's really interesting. So have you heard of Dr. John DeMartini?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm a facilitator of his work, and it's interesting because it's a similar thing, but it's much more in your head, right? So it's shifting your perceptions through balancing them out, because he believes that there's an unconscious conscious split that always happens, and that we're only seeing the conscious part. So the method helps you bring the unconscious conscious. So it's similar. But your method is like another layer to me of like the feeling aspect of it, and it's just like a whole different tool that is mind blowing to me. I want to get, so everyone knows I love to nerd out and like dig deep. I could talk to you all day about this kind of stuff. But I want for listeners some really practical takeaways in your book. When you say you have 7 simple steps to health, love, and success, can you share some of that so that listeners have really practical takeaways today?
Absolutely, because when I'm talking, what I have learned is how the emotional operating system organically works. And when we let it work, some of the steps to letting it work are so simple that you're like, duh, I mean, there's no rocket science here, but it is not to be underestimated. I can tell you that as you're talking, about it. So the very first thing I would say is breathe. That continue, especially when you're feeling emotion or you're feeling anxious or you're just wanting to tune into yourself. Focus on your breathing, because what happens neurologically is breath, it can be controlled, but it's also part of the autonomic or the involuntary nervous system. So what happens through controlling the breath, we actually can connect with the place in the brain where fear and anxiety originate, because that's not a logical place. It's not in the logical mind. And so you can't directly control it except in some way like this, where we can control our breath. So if you focus on your breathing and you actually change up your breathing, like focus on breathing faster or slower, or all of a sudden switching, whether your inhale or your long hail, your exhale is shorter or longer, switching that up, what happens, your body starts to calm that area of the brain, so that you immediately start to center in your body. So it brings you present in your body first. So that's just the organic experience. And then as you breathe, then, and this changes for kids, but it's like closing our eyes changes our perspective. It automatically turns our attention away from the outer world to the inner experience, where that's the source of what's going on. That's where you're going to find information about, well, what's really happening here, and what do I need to do? What information do I need? What action do I need to take in order to feel safe, emotionally safe? And emotional safety is such a huge thing. And yet we really rarely talk about it. But in the RIM work, it's really a central core factor. And so that as you close your eyes and focus inward, then there is already a shift. Because what happens in the optic nerve takes in all this information constantly. Well, then your brain has to do something with it. So it has to start making up stories. It has to start measuring, collecting data, which, it's a gift. We want that. It's an important in the right place and time, but it doesn't relate to processing emotion. So we're not managing emotion. We're processing emotion. And so what happens, the way I like to think about it, and I talk about it in the book a lot, is that organically information is coming in through the body constantly. It's called interoception. And we're gaining a body awareness and a subjective or a feeling awareness, but not an intellectual awareness about it. And so as it flows through, I think of it as like a river of emotion flowing through the body. And if we allow that river of emotion to bring us information about what we're feeling in the moment, what that's about, it's like just to receive it, that then it flows on out down the river. If we are resistant, afraid, or highly managing or controlling it, then what happens, it's like creating the dam in the river. And so now that emotion that we really don't want to feel is stuck there. And it can be all kinds of emotion. It doesn't even have to be scary. It can just mean that it can get stuck if we're not allowing the flow. So the biggest thing is when there's any kind of sense of what you're experiencing, like you're feeling all of a sudden, I don't feel quite right, I feel a little anxious, whatever, to be really tuning into your body and your feelings constantly as much as you can. It becomes a habit. It's kind of like, actually the emotional system, I've learned, is very parallel to the body system. So we're constantly aware of, like, am I warm? Is this a warm or cold? Do I need to put a jacket on? Do I need to turn the heat up? Do I put the air conditioning on? It's the same constant feedback system. The same way, only it's with emotion.
Right.
And so if we turn that off, we won't be able to keep ourselves safe. We won't have enough information to keep ourselves emotionally safe the way we learn to keep ourselves physically safe. And so those are things. And so with RIM, what we're doing, the steps in the book actually teach you how to do for yourself to create floodgates for that river of emotion to be able to flow without causing flooding. Because that's what we're always afraid of, getting flooded. We don't want to get flooded with emotion and feel out of control. But with RIM, you don't have to, because there are all kinds of safety mechanisms to bring in.
Oh, so powerful. So practically, I want to, what I'm thinking of is any person, and it sounds like, you're going into schools and teaching it to kids, right? So that they have a tool to process their emotions.
Right.
So anyone can use it, and it's applicable to any situation, it sounds like. And what I'm thinking about, and when I'm thinking about my clients specifically, or people I've worked with, it's like there's a lot of anxiety that gets built up, self-doubt, fear around building a new business, around taking on something new in your life. So they could use this method really to reduce the anxiety, allow the flow of emotions, so that they can be more resourced to do what they want to do, instead of having their emotional resistance take up a whole bunch of energy.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. Because that when you have a dam there, it's like your energy's caught up in
holding it up.
The dam. Yeah. And so that's constant energy being leaked away.
Yeah.
And as an entrepreneur, I know it takes a lot of energy there, because you really have to be, you're really everything.
Yeah.
And if you have people helping you, you're still the receiver of all that's going on. You're keeping your pulse on the work. And so it really would. So it would help keep an aliveness in that process, so that you don't have to work physically so hard. So in the end, it's less fatiguing, it's more energizing, and that you start to you're creating space. Like when we live this way, then what happens, we become a radar that is allowing the creative intuition to bring new ideas.
Oh, I love that.
And like which direction, because with intuition, the problem is the whole definition of intuition is knowing something without knowing how you know it. Yeah. And so we can be very leery of that, and we start to make our business decisions based on logic. And then you really lose the potential for a quantum leap, because it's a magical connection. And so we want to encourage those. So what happens is it leaves an entrepreneur really tuned in to making decisions in a way that are really fortuitous.
Yeah, to me, it's grounded in your power, right? It's your center of power when you're connected with yourself, and when you're aligned and congruent in yourself, right? And you're connected, and you're allowing your feelings to come through. And I want everyone to rewind to what you just said, because that was like so powerful. You said becoming, I didn't get it all written down, but I'm like, oh, I've got to rewind that. That was incredible. Becoming a radar that allows, you said it for your creative something.
Creative awareness.
Creative awareness. Yeah. So it's like, what better gift is that for anybody, especially entrepreneurs, but anybody in your life? Our businesses are constantly in this flow of creative evolution. And you also use the word quantum leap, which I love. So it's so incredible. A vulnerable share for everyone listening. I'm sick right now, and I lost my voice this week. I haven't been sick to the point of I had to actually cancel an entire client day, which I haven't opted out of a work day in probably 10 years. I don't know. I can't even remember. It's probably been 10 years since I was sick enough where I was like in bed or couldn't work or something along those lines. And whenever I have something like that going on, I always go to this place of like, what am I repressing? Like what's the mind-body connection piece? And I had a pretty big emotional flow this weekend. and I had that revelation. It was like, oh, I have completely repressed this huge emotional reality of I had, my partner and I broke up about 8 months ago, and I found out he had an affair, and we broke up, and I did a really good job of managing that everyone can see in quotes, managing the emotions around it to where I was totally functional, and from what I could tell felt really okay. Like I was like, I'm okay. Like I've dealt with the processing of it. I dealt with the grief of it. I've learned to shift my perception. I can see the wins in it. I can see the learning lessons. I can send him off in love, like all of those things. But I hadn't really let myself have a massive emotional meltdown. And so here we are, 8 months later, and I had a massive emotional meltdown, and I got sick, and it was like, oh, okay, that's what happens when you repress your emotions. And I wasn't conscious of it, like I didn't know until I got sick, and then I really started to allow myself to cry and feel, and it makes me realize, it's like I'm a coach and I'm human and I have stuff I can't see sometimes, but it really reminds me, like everything you're saying really resonates with this place of how much energy it takes when we are doing that. And so how powerful it is to tap into your emotions, to allow them to arise, to be friends with them instead of trying to force the feelings away.
Exactly. And it's not uncommon when we're not in tune with something that's big. It's kind of like if you think about the river of emotion, there are times it may feel like a tsunami.
Yeah.
And it's like if we ignore it, what happens, it'll come through either through the body, or I'll find if it'll wake me up in the middle of the night because my mind is empty, and a thought or an awareness and insight will come through. So I just keep paper and pen beside my bed just in case. Now, the one thing I have learned, and I do a lot of, I help Jack with Canfield with his seminars. So, and he teaches business people. He attracts, he's all about having greater success. So he teaches all of these business people who show up in his conferences how to meditate. So that what I have found is when I started to meditate, then I didn't have as many other ways that my psyche was getting my attention. It would show up. And honestly, at the time when I had the experience with my dad, I was meditating an hour every morning. And I did that for about 15 years. And I think that's why it was able to show up in that way, in such a, magical way of hearing, connecting with him and then starting my journey. I think
because you're saying because you were open to that field of awareness, really.
Exactly.
That's so cool. So I start every session, and even in my group coaching, I start every session with meditation. And to me, it's so powerful. It's just, and it's something that's so overlooked as such a powerful habit. And I always ask, and I'm about to ask you, I could talk to you for a lot longer, but I want to keep in mind listeners' attention span, I'm about to ask you your top 3 max potential habits, but often the people that I've had on, I would say, I don't know, I need to go back and do an analysis of it, but at least half of them talk about meditation. And, it's such a powerful tool for everybody. And you're in your book. So first, let's go here. before I get, I get distracted, I want to ask you a whole bunch of questions about how people can connect with you. What would you say are your top 3 max potential habits that got you where you are today? And you can interpret that as in your business, in your life, in RIM, whatever it is. What would you say are the top 3 max potential habits that you'd want to share with listeners?
I think that the biggest thing is because I was born a right brain dominant person. My journey has been to really hone my left brain. So, which is why I have two graduate degrees and continue to attend things to keep my learning going, because I was so right brain. I was very intuitive, so that was really a gift, and it really facilitated my ease in life and success in life. It's really important to be whole brained, and they fit together. Like, one is not better than the other. They're both essential. And so whichever you are, you want to pursue the other.
I love that.
I have, there are some people who come in to do sessions. I do just a small amount of sessions because I'm mostly teaching, but that are very logic oriented. They train themselves over the years. It's kind of like, especially people who have had trauma, can really like to maintain emotional control and think as that feeling that that we are safe, but it's of course the opposite, because then things are happening we're not aware of, which leaves us a little bit more vulnerable. But so that, geez, I just lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
No worries. You're talking about working with your whole brain.
Oh, right.
Yep.
So that's number one.
Okay.
It is to whatever your strength is, because your strength may be in logic, or it may be in in the creative emotional side. Whichever it is, value it, keep it flowing, and develop the other to become hand in hand with
Love
it.
So, definitely no one has said that one yet. Okay, awesome.
Number 2, I would say, is to really follow what calls you without, and trust it, because that's really been the secret. Otherwise, RIM could not have ever formulated, and it was only, and I think it was really only because of who I am. It really came out of who I was, how my brain worked, and that when I started really allowing it to come in, I was so burned out with the logic, because I'd been a psychotherapist for over 20 years, and I was just fatigued.
Yeah, you're ready for something else.
I was so ready for something else. And so I started to, I actually closed my psychotherapy practice and began to play. And part of that got stimulated because we did take a personal sabbatical to Australia, where I didn't work for a year. It allowed me to realize how weary I was with work, and to start allowing greater creativity, and to start really trusting who I am and following that, saying yes to who I am, what I liked, what felt right, what felt good. Without it, it wasn't about overindulgence or pleasure. It was more about being drawn. What is attracting you? And trusting that, and so I in the beginning, RIM, the creation of RIM, was really just all about me because I was so burned out. But in the end, I learned, and I was, I didn't even charge for sessions because I didn't know what I was doing. It was about me. I was doing it for friends and just learning, and it was so much fun. And so I began to realize, wow, this is just really powerful. It's got to go beyond me, because it's not really just about me. It's about all of us and our resourcefulness, our natural resourcefulness. So that would be the second thing, is following what calls us. The third thing I would say is to really live the work. That's one of the things with my students, that there's a huge personal growth. There's always, a personal growth focus or track in every class. That's very powerful, because when we live it, it naturally happens. and we naturally are with clients in a way that allows them to go places they didn't know existed. And so to walk the talk is not always easy. We all know that. And so with RIM, what I would say the biggest way to walk the talk is to live allowing your feelings and really receiving them as direction, and knowing. And it's kind of like, it doesn't mean that we let ourselves be impulsive, to act impulsively. It's not about that. It is about allowing the physical, like feelings, like anger is a good example because it's so intense. So there's a physical charge. There's a charge in the body with emotion because that's where it originates from. And so we have to address that first, because otherwise the logical mind can't really understand what's going on. We can't really see clearly enough to know what the issue is, what we need to do, what the next step is. And so to really constantly live that, it starts to get, it's really quick. It doesn't have to be long or lengthy or protracted at all. And it doesn't even have to be painful, because what happens is when you say, I'm just going to feel it, I'm just going to feel this as much as I can, whatever it is, all of a sudden when all the resistance is gone, the organic system just flows and it just automatically dissipates. So it's only in our resistance. I think, the Buddha said, it's not what happens to us that is the problem, it's our resistance.
So true. Yeah.
That creates the problem.
Yeah, so powerful. Do you know David Hawkins' work?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, that reminds me. I just read his book, Letting Go, and my last guest was talking about his work. I think it's so funny when that happens, but it's that idea of leaning into it all the way and allowing it to happen, because then you let go of the resistance, so then it can pass. Instead of exactly like you're talking with the dam, it's like we resist creating the dam and then it can flow. But if we create the dam, it takes work until something happens where the dam is going to have to probably break at some point, right, which could show up as disease or mental illness or, sadness, frustration, anxiety, on and on and on. It's
exactly.
Yeah, so powerful. This has been filled with so many gems of wisdom. Thank you so very much for being here. I know that people are going to want to connect with you and get your book. So tell listeners where they can find you.
So goodbyehurtandpain.com.
Okay.
That's easier to remember. It is the RIM Institute website.com, but I think the Goodbye Hurt and Pain is easier to remember.
Awesome. Okay. So Goodbye Hurt and Pain, that link will be in the show notes. And then that's also your book, Goodbye Hurt and Pain, 7 Simple Steps to Health, Love, and Success. Everyone needs to have this book. I'm certain of it. And reach out to me if you're local in the Boulder, Colorado area. I have an incredible facilitator you can work with for RIM. I really want to get trained. It's on my list for this year to go to a training. So, I have another tool in my toolkit. And you also, on your website, if they go to Goodbye Hurt and Pain, is that a place where they can find facilitators for across the nation?
Yeah, it all goes to the same website.
Okay, perfect.
That there, if you hit on the website, there is the RIM Institute.
Okay.
Just click on that and then you get all of it. You get a Science of RIM page, you get a directory page, directory of facilitators. And also there is on the homepage, you can take an EOS test quiz.
Oh, cool.
To see where you're being very effective, you're really using your emotional operating system or you're overriding it.
Okay, awesome. And then I remember when we were talking pre-show, you were talking about meditation.
Right.
Also,
exactly. Yes, you can also sign up. Well, you can actually click into, it's under the blog.
Okay.
Those are really meditations.
Okay.
And if you want to get one sent to your inbox, an audio meditation close to every month, then you can sign up for that.
Awesome. Okay, so everyone listening, Dr. Deb has given you tons of incredible resources, not only in today's show, but also on her website. Be sure to connect. I'm telling you, her work is life-altering. Thank you for coming on. I love that I got to hang out with you here, and I know I'm going to meet you in person at some point soon. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Amanda. It's just been so much fun.
Awesome. Great.
And I'm sure we will meet.
Yes, I look forward to it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'd love to hear from you. Make sure that you shout us out, take a screenshot of the podcast, blast out on any of your social media platforms that you prefer with the handle NFA Coaching, and let us know what you got out of today's show. And I will see you next week. I hope you all have an incredible week where you thrive and feel alive. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Max Potential Habits podcast. If you're liking what you've heard, it would be so incredibly awesome if you would subscribe to the channel and leave a 5-star rating and a written review. This helps me help more people while we grow our NFA community so we can rock it out together. For Max Potential Habits resources, go to nfacoaching.com where you can access all of my resources. There's free ebooks, PDF checklists, a journal template, a business mindset meditation kit, and so much more. Plus, links to NFA coaching on Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And if you're super serious about up-leveling, there's also a link to schedule a free consult to work with me in group or one-on-one coaching. Until next time, I hope you have a Max Potential Habits Day where you get inspired to do whatever it takes to transform into the most empowered version of yourself so you can lead a rich, thriving, kick-ass life and business.